Good morning, all. This is Anushri from People Matters, and we are back with an exciting session of our webcast in partnership with Center for Creative Leadership on the topic Kick Some Glass: How Women Can Succeed at Work on Their Own Terms. A World Bank report on female labor force participation ranks India on 121st place out of 131 countries, and the reasons are varied and complex, right from the workplace support systems to societal attitudes. A study by McKinsey notes that India's GDP could improve by 16 to 60% by 2025 by enabling women to participate in the economy. What can women do to feel empowered at the workplace? How can they apply scientific tips that can help them accelerate their career? In a high energy presentation, Jennifer Martinu of the Center for Creative Leadership will share the research based lessons captured in the book Kick Some Glass 10 Ways Women Succeed at Work on Their Own Terms. The author will highlight some strategies for advancement one can apply personally or as a mentor, sponsor, or women's initiative leader. In today's webcast, we'll cover broad points like what are the challenges that women are facing at work? Why is it important to address these challenges or issues? What does scientific research have to say about addressing workplace issues? How can women succeed in the workplace on their own terms? I take the
बेटा you have to log on. The session is for the speaker alone. Hangout से बंद कर दो.
Sorry, there was some disturbance. Continuing with the webcast, I would take the pleasure to invite and introduce the speaker for today, Jennifer Martinu, Senior Vice President, Research, Evaluation, and Societal Advancement, Center for Creative Leadership. With over 25 years of experience in the leadership development field, Jennifer has served various leaders, organizations, and communities globally, including healthcare, government, military, education, community leadership, pharmaceuticals, and energy. Through organizational change, impact, evaluation, high impact design, delivery of programs, and research, she brings a deep expertise in leadership research and how to apply it in a practical, powerful ways for leaders and organizations. She's also a speaker, author, mother, and a passionate advocate for women's leadership. Our partner for today's webcast is Center for Creative Leadership. The Center for Creative Leadership, CCL, is a top ranked global provider of leadership development. By leveraging the power of leadership to drive results that matter most to clients, CCL transforms individual leaders, teams, organizations, and society. Ranked among the world's top 5 providers of executive education by Financial Times and in the top 10 by Bloomberg Business Week, CCL has offices globally, including America, Middle East, Russia, South Africa, Singapore, India, and China. So before we move to the webcast, we have saved time for you to ask your questions at the end of the webcast. For those who are live, can simply submit post questions at any time during session. We'll try to respond to as many questions as time allows. So we have an exciting topic to discuss in this webcast today. So without any further delay, let me invite Jennifer to take over. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Anushri. I'm so happy to be with all of you today. Let me open up the screen show and share my presentation, and we will get started. There we go. All right. So I appreciate all of you being with us today. My co-author, Portia Mount, and I are really enjoying sharing the book, Kick Some Glass, which was written in partnership with CCL, 10 Ways Women Succeed at Work on Their Own Terms. We are part of the Center for Creative Leadership, and you did hear a little bit about us from Anushree. Our mission is to advance the understanding, practice, and development of leadership for the benefit of society worldwide. We've been established as an organization since 1970, having been founded by the Smith Richardson family, the family that created the Vicks products, Vicks Vapor Rub, many people are familiar with. And we now have over 700 faculty and staff around the world, as Anushree mentioned. We serve over 60,000 leaders through 3,000 organizations annually across more than 100 countries. So we're really pleased to be able to share this research and these initiatives and strategies with people all around the world. We are based here in India. Our office here, our established office here, is in Gurgaon, and are pleased to be sharing this research with several of our clients while we're here this week. In terms of CCL's pioneering work on women's leadership and leadership development, we were the first executive education organization in the world to develop a single identity leadership program. And our first book on women's leadership was called Breaking the Glass Ceiling. We based this on research that we did in the early 1980s, early to mid 1980s. And then we updated that same research in 2002. And published it in the book called Standing at the Crossroads. Both of these books and all of the research that we do around women's leadership and women's leadership development are pulled into solutions that we offer. So those come in the form of open enrollment programs like our Women's Leadership Experience and Advancing Technical Women, as well as custom iterations of those programs that we offer for organizations around the world. So we're pleased to be able to share these findings not only in the book itself, but in the solutions that we provide for our clients. A little bit about me, a little bit more before we get started, so you have a sense of who this person is speaking with you. I've lived through the experiences that we talk about in the book. This is part of why Portia and I decided to take on this book. We are both senior leaders. Portia also having been a senior leader at CCL and now at another organization. We both were very passionate about developing women, and our mothers, in my case, I have 3 adult children and now a son-in-law, and have been serving in these balanced roles in complete partnership with my husband, Jim, for the last 29 years. When we have free time, we love to spend time on the water or near the water. So the beach and the lake are something that really energize me anyway. And I've shifted from a cat lover to a dog lover, thanks to some dogs that we've had the last 12 or so years. So that's a little bit about who's speaking with you right now. I'm going to share, after I give a little bit of background, I'm going to share some of the 10 ways that women succeed in the workplace on their own terms, and let you, I'll encourage you to do some reflection after we finish the webinar in a couple of those areas in particular. And then, as Anushree said, we'll have questions and comments taken toward the end. Now, Portia and I were realizing about 5 or 6 years ago that CCL, as I said, our last book around women's leadership had been written in 2002. And although we've been working in this space, we hadn't really put forth an assertive voice in the women's leadership space for a number of years. And we thought that CCL needed to do that. So we gathered a number of people around the organization who are doing work in this space and pulled together a shared point of view around how to develop girls and women globally. And we also, as part of that, we're looking at the current situation for leadership around the world. And from all of this, we decided it might be time not only for a current voice, but for a book. So let me share some of what we learned. We learned that for many years, here's a snapshot just between 97 and 2009, that women have made vast strides in leadership roles. We have increased the number of women, the percentage of women on boards and in top executive positions and CEO roles. And so that should be the good news, right? We should look at that and think, wonderful, we've been making great progress. So why are we still having the conversation about not having enough women in leadership roles? Well, it's because data like these that show that as recently as 2016, there were more men named John in CEO roles and on boards than there were all women in those roles in S&P 1500 and S&P 500 respectively. So we still have quite a ways to go, as you can see. And what ends up happening, what we notice is that at the entry levels, we may have early equal percentages of women and men. And sometimes in many organizations and industries, we actually have more women in entry levels than we do men. But as we move up through manager and director and so forth, up through leadership levels, you can continue to see this drop off of the percentage, the ratio of women in these roles, to the point that when you get to the C-suite, there's a very small percentage of women in those roles. So yes, we've been making progress, but we're not seeing the progress stretch all the way through leadership roles. And we think about this as a pipeline problem. The pipeline, if you will, is cutting off women for some reason as they move through leadership levels, and we wanted to better understand that. So we turned to some of our colleagues, and some of you may be familiar with the saying that men are seen as the boss and women are seen as bossy. This particular statement or analogy comes from the time when Sheryl Sandberg published the book Lean In, and noted that many girls get called bossy. And then there were lots of programs and initiatives that started up called Ban Bossy. Well, we wanted to know, what does it look like in the adult world? So does that sense of bossiness, is this the boss versus bossy, still occurring in the adult world, and particularly in leadership roles? We used our panel of clients and asked them, both men and women, that if you see someone as a leader acting bossy, whether it's a man or a woman, what do you see them doing? How do you describe their behaviors? And what they said to us is, well, they're being dictatorial. They're being authoritarian. They're not sharing decision making. They're not being collaborative. So all of those descriptions, and many like them, were coming forward to us. We then went into our 360-degree database, and as you probably know, 360 assessments are those that are taken about a leader, and ratings are completed by that leader's peers, direct reports, and boss in particular, and maybe some other people, their clients and others around them. So we wanted to look at whether those bossy behaviors were showing up and whether there were gender differences. So we mapped those descriptions to the behaviors that we see in the 360-degree assessment and looked for gender differences. And in fact, we see that men are just as likely as women to exhibit bossy behaviors at work. There was no gender difference there. But women are still twice as likely to be called bossy at work. When people, men or women, are exhibiting bossy behavior, they are also seen as being unpromotable by the people who provide their 360 ratings. And yet it hurts promotability for women more than it does for men. Bossy men are predicted to be more successful than bossy women, and bossy women are seen as less popular than bossy men. So if bossiness is something that's getting in the way, that could be one potential explanation for the pipeline problem. Then there's the queen bee. Now, if you've heard this analogy, this is like the queen bee in a beehive. There is only one queen bee in every beehive. And people were saying that when women make it to very senior levels of organizations or governments or entities, that they're not as likely to draw other women through the leadership ranks. It seems as if they want it all to themselves. And so they're called this notion of a queen bee, that it's somebody who's bullying subordinates and obstructing other women's career advancement. But we knew, Portia and I knew through the women that we had been meeting with, that wasn't the case. They actually wanted to bring other women along. So one of our colleagues in Singapore, Sophia Zhao, did a study where she looked at this notion and gave hypothetical hiring situations to both women and men, The hiring situations were, here's a team, here's its makeup in lots of different descriptions of the demographics, and here are some candidates. And those candidates were both men and women, and they were equally qualified. What we found were that if women advocated to bring other women onto those teams, they were seen as less competent and lower performing than the men who were doing the very same thing. So valuing diversity was seen as a positive for men and a negative for women. So we wondered if that might be part of the pipeline problem. We also looked at why businesses should care. Well, some of the data shared that businesses are more financially successful if they have a high percentage of women on their boards. Return on equity, return on sales, return on invested capital, and so forth are all much stronger when companies have higher percentages of women on their boards. We then asked some of our leadership participants about their sense of what happens in organizations when they have more women in the leaders in the organization. And both men and women both said when they had more women as leaders in the organization that they felt more career support. They felt like they were more committed to the organization and more engaged in their roles. And they felt they had less burnout. So your talent pool, if this is the case, your talent pool is more likely to be higher performing and not turning over as frequently. That's also a benefit to organizations. So with all of this, Portia and I decided that not only is it time for CCL to bring its voice more toward the women's leadership space again, but also it was time for a book that brought together the research that CCL has done in many, many different ways that helps us understand the barriers that women run into and the ways in which they can push through those barriers. We also wanted to shine some light on what organizations can do and what men can do in particular, because we know, looking at that pipeline, that we have a higher percentage of men in those leadership roles than we do women. So we clearly need the partnership of the men in those roles. So we took on writing this book and called it Kick Some Glass, because we really want people who read it, both men and women, to have energy and drive about removing the barriers that stand in the way. Women are strong. This is not a book that says that you have problems and you're weak and you need to get through them. This is a book that says these are barriers that you run into. They're very real, and we have strategies that we've tested through research, and we've tested through our work with our women leaders in women leadership programs. We know that these work, and so we wanted to bring all of this research to you directly. In doing so, we also decided to interview senior level women and some senior level men who are passionate about increasing the percentage, the likelihood of women moving into leadership roles. So we've woven their stories throughout the chapters as well. Now, each of the chapters, and here there are 10 of them, are framed around a particular barrier that women run into. And sometimes men run into them too, as I need to say. And we want to call out that barrier because we want you to know you're not crazy. It's not just you. These really are barriers. These are glass ceilings that we're running into. And we want to help you get through them through exercises and research. Every chapter has at least one exercise and some reflection that you'll do. So let's get into it, shall we? We're going to walk through each of these quickly, but give you a sense of the barriers and some of the ways you can break through them. So the first is that it's important to do is to live your intention. One of the barriers that we learned by talking with women was they didn't always have a view, a goal for where they wanted to go, what was driving them. They sometimes took job opportunities because they came along, not because those opportunities were something that were ideal for helping them achieve their intention. So in this chapter, we ask people to map their values. We have a values explorer exercise. And what you're doing is you're identifying the values that are so critical to you that you will never compromise on them. And that can help you make choices about the path that you take and how if you're not going to stay right on the path, maybe you have to step off for a little bit. But you know how to use your values to get back on that path ultimately. Now, what gets in the way of our doing that, and this is what many women told us, was that, I never saw myself as a leader. So they had personal expectations that got in the way of driving down the path, that intention toward leadership. Sometimes it was others' expectations, a boss, parents, spouse, or significant other, partners who didn't see them as leaders and didn't coach and guide and support them in taking opportunities that would help them reach that achievement. Sometimes it was organizational practices, and these can be practices that make assumptions about what kinds of roles women want to take, and therefore don't provide the kinds of opportunities to build leadership capabilities for women. Maybe they have this notion in mind that a woman won't want to go out to a remote area to run a plant for a business. And they don't ask her if she wants to do that. They just go ahead and offer it to a man instead. That happens, and that's an organizational practice that gets in the way. Sometimes it's cultural beliefs and practices. And a story that I love to share here is about one of my friends and someone I've worked with who is a nuclear physicist in Saudi Arabia. She works at the very largest women's university in the world, which happens to be in Saudi Arabia. And she's a very successful academic teaching nuclear physics. But what she really wanted to do when she was little was she wanted to be a doctor. However, in her culture at that time, that wasn't possible for her, because in order to be a doctor, she would need to train beside men who were not of her family and be alone in hospitals and medical settings with them. And that wasn't appropriate. So she was not allowed to pursue being a doctor at that time. So that's an example, an extreme one perhaps, but an example of a cultural belief and practice that can get in the way of someone identifying and then living their intention. So when we finished this webinar, I would encourage you to think about where you want to be in 5 to 10 years, what's gotten in your way, and what can you do to get back on track. It's really important to build that foundation, because as we move into the next steps, you'll want to have a sense of what's really important to you. Then what you'll do is you'll step into your own power. You will become your own agent. So agency is this human desire that we have to control our life and to excel. If you think about a metaphor for being our own agent, it's when people have people who are athletes or celebrities have agents who guide them, who negotiate for them, who put them in front of roles that would be good to help them reach their intention. Most of us don't have agents. So it's important for us to be our own. And it means we need to be clear about our direction. That goes back to understanding our intention. We need to take planful actions and calculated risks toward that intention. We need to be aware of the reactions we're having, what we're learning, be self-aware in terms of the growth that we're having in leadership. And certainly circumstances are going to continue to change. So that intention may change over time, and we have to be willing to admit that to ourselves and to be our agent and say, hey, it's time to take a different path. This one's not going to work. In doing so, we have to be resilient. Because things change, we have to be able to bounce back and not have such a significant setback when our life is changing. We need to learn from it. And if something isn't working for us, we need to let go. Often what gets in the way of being our own agent is we might be uncomfortable taking authority. And a lot of this has to do with acculturation. We've been taught from a young age not to be the boss. We get told, don't be bossy. And so we learn not to take authority, not to put ourselves out there and say, this is something that I think is important and I want to do. I described already some dysfunctional work environments. That might get in the way of our being our own agent and advocating for ourselves. If we're not clear about our intention, it can get in our way. And if we have outdated mental models, for example, if we think about leadership and we see leadership as something that is not something that's suited to us, to women for some reason, because we haven't had role models that were women leaders or whatever reason it may be, that's an outdated mental model, and it can get in our way of being our own agent and speaking up for us. So we've got to pay attention to those things. The third way that we can break through those barriers, those glass ceilings, is to define success our own way. So success for me will look different than success for you. And for some of us, it may not look like moving through leadership ranks. Certainly for me, that's not what I wanted when I was early in my career. It's not what I saw for myself. But as I said earlier, things change, circumstances change. I began to break mental models and see that I could succeed as a leader, and I actually enjoy it. I enjoy leading people and leading teams and leading strategy and so forth. So defining success your way is an important part of being able to move along that path for our intention. Some ways to do that are to recognize the signs when our current job is no longer meeting our needs. So perhaps it's been a great job and we've enjoyed it, but at some point we realize that it's not enough for us. Now, we don't have to leave it right away, but by recognizing that we're not going to be there for the long run in that particular job, it frees us up both in a time perspective and in a mental perspective to do some other things that help us define success our way. So we might explore outside interests. We might take on roles that allow us to be leaders, such as on charity boards or on school boards, and so forth. So how can we get introduced to new networks, to new people, new opportunities, and build our leadership capabilities? Doing so helps us build the groundwork for our next move because we are meeting new people. We're expanding our mindset about what's possible for us. We might also start a new side hustle, start a small business, not something that takes over your life necessarily, but something that allows you, again, to meet new people, try out new skills, maybe build a business plan if that's an important part of the way that you see your intention going forward, is having that skill set. So starting a side hustle is a way that we can define what success looks like for us. It might lead into some future role that we hadn't anticipated. Gathering a group of advisors, and we'll talk about this in more detail next in terms of our network, but we need people around us who can give us advice, who can direct and guide us and let us know when they think we're on a track that is what we want to be on and when they see through their lens that we're not. And always, as I've said, be prepared to adapt, to iterate, to shift as you're reinventing yourself. Now, I mentioned network. And our network of champions are people who have influence over us and in a good way. Well, mostly in a good way. Sometimes it might not be. But we want to build a network of people who have roles, who play roles that can help us in some way. Some of those may be in our network and influence us through power. So they may have positional power. They may be in our hierarchy, and they can make things happen because they're at a higher level than us. They may have expertise that we can learn from. They may have access to rewards and punishment that can support us or push us when we're not doing what we need to be doing. In terms of relationships, these people may or may not be in our hierarchical structure, but they have social capital with us and we with them. We trust each other and others trust them. So they can introduce us to their network and help us build our own social capital through theirs. And they can guide us to information that we may not have access to, but we get access to it through their networks and their connections. In the chapter, we help people map their network. And two of the specific roles that we talk about in this chapter are mentors and sponsors, both of which are important for us to have. We tend as women to be over-mentored and under-sponsored, meaning that we have lots of people who want to and can play mentorship roles for us, but not as many who can serve as sponsors for us. So let me distinguish those two. Mentors are people who can sit at any level of an organization and they give us support and feedback and advice. They might help us, especially if they're in our organization, to navigate the corporate policies. They want to increase our sense of competence, our self-worth, and they're very interested in our personal and professional development. So you can see how those are really valuable relationships to have, and we need those. But we also need sponsors. Sponsors really need to be senior leaders, senior managers who have influence. Because of that, and think about the pipeline, because senior leaders are more likely to be men, there are more men in those levels. And unless an organization has a structured sponsorship program that provides and matches sponsors to women leaders, human beings are by nature going to be attracted to people who are like us. And so those senior male managers and leaders are more likely to seek out male sponsees, male leaders they want to sponsor, than they are women. And so that's part of the reason that we have less access to sponsors. But we really need to have them, because you can see what they do is they give us exposure to other executives. They bring us into their network. They provide challenging assignments for us, new opportunities to build our leadership capabilities, and for people to see that we are potential leaders in their organization. They protect us from negative publicity, and they really fight to get their people promoted. So how do you find a sponsor if your organization doesn't offer a sponsorship program? Well, you look for people like this who are doing these kinds of activities for their own team members, for someone you might suspect is they're sponsoring. You seek them out. You ask them if they would be your sponsor. Now, in some cases, they may be several levels higher than you, and it may not feel comfortable. It may not be appropriate for you to seek them out on your own. So if that's the case, then find someone in your network who has access to that person and have them introduce you. So you're using your network to find that particular sponsor that's needed to help you. Another barrier that women and frankly men run into is called the imposter syndrome. Portia Mount and another colleague, Susan Tardanico, have written a little book on this that dives into some depth on it, and we've incorporated a lot of this wisdom and exercises in our book as well. Now, if you find yourself saying something when you get a compliment and you're thinking or you're saying, well, you're just saying it because you like me, or I had a lot of help, or it was a team effort, you're not, I just got lucky, anybody could have done it. You're not taking credit. You're not taking the appropriate credit that you're being given for the accomplishment you're responsible for. That's not about being humble. That's about having a lack of confidence in yourself, and a pretty extreme one. And it makes you feel like you don't deserve to be in the position that you've earned. You really don't even feel like you earned it. You feel like you got it just by happenstance or through luck or because people liked you. And so what we want to help people think about are ways to beat that imposter syndrome. So one is to focus on the facts. Focusing on the facts means really looking at the truth of what's happening and giving yourself credit for having been promoted over time, or having strong performance ratings, or having accomplished really very positive, productive things in the work that you're doing. Those are the facts. And you need to not deny those. You need to see them and admit them and use them to boost your confidence. You also need to challenge limiting beliefs. I actually had imposter syndrome for 20 years in my career, the first 20 years. And it had to do with the way I joined the Center for Creative Leadership. It wasn't through a formal selection process. It was through an informal introduction through my network. I was hired on to be a contract employee on a particular project because there wasn't a job available. Within about 4 or 5 months, I was brought on as a full-time employee and staff. Now, I could have looked at that fact and claimed the strength that I was, clearly demonstrating. They were seeing it. That's why I was hired on, but I didn't. I had this limiting belief that the only way to really get hired into CCL was to go through a very formal selection process, which my colleagues all did. And so that held me back in some ways from taking certainly taking credit for the accomplishments I had, but also taking some risks that would have moved me along the leadership path faster, I think. So I wasn't claiming my strengths. I wasn't challenging those limiting beliefs. I also wasn't talking about what imposter syndrome was doing to me. Instead of admitting that to my colleagues so that they could say, no, Jennifer, here are the facts, here are your strengths, and help me work through it. I held it to myself until the job that I'm in now, which I got 5 years ago, through a formal selection process. And that really kind of broke me of it. And I can now look back and talk about it and see the first 20 years for what they were. I hope if you have imposter syndrome, you don't take that long to get through it. talk with people about it, because they can help you get through it. And doing so also can help them, if they happen to have imposter syndrome, get through it as well. Getting fit to lead is something that is an interesting aspect of this glass ceiling, but we find in our research that many of our colleagues have done with senior leaders that being healthy and fit is something that is correlated with perceptions of effective leadership. So what I'm sharing here is a research study which asked, again, on a 360 assessment, whether a leader was perceived as having energy, being energetic, being productive, being optimistic, etc. These are characteristics of effective leadership. We also asked if they were perceived as being active. So is this leader active, or is this leader not active? And you can see by the graphics that just by being perceived as being active, frankly, even if they weren't, they were seen more positively through the lens of these leadership characteristics. So, okay, how do we get perceived as being active? Well, we've got to find energy. We have to find ways to bring energy to our lives so that we bring energy into our workplace, into who we are in our workplace. So I'm sharing here several ways that you could think about finding energy through exercise, through eating well, through sleep, through meditation, through mindfulness, etc. Those are ways that we certainly can add to our energy, and we need to bring that then to work. We need people to see that in us, because when we're being considered for leadership roles, for promotion, if they are judging part of our leadership effectiveness on whether they perceive us to be fit, then what we need to do is to help them in that perception, help them perceive us as fit. Now, this next barrier is something that is really challenging, especially for women with children, but also for women who are caring for their elders. And oftentimes they face challenges such as inefficient or inflexible leave policies that tell them that they don't have enough time. They don't have the time that they want and need to be out of work with their family. And so they'd rather just drop out of the workforce rather than fight the battle of coming back before they're ready to, or before their family's ready for them to. That may be a barrier that's getting in the way. They also may wonder whether their job would still be there. So if I'm a young mother and I want to take a year off to spend with my young child, I worry that when I come back, I may not have a job, or that it may be so different it's not the job I enjoy doing. So if that's going to be the case, why bother, right? Let's just skip out. I also may worry, and there is research that back this, that my reputation will suffer. Indeed, women and men who are focusing time, taking time away to be with children, to be with aging parents, to be with family, are seen as being less committed to their role and to the organization. And so reputational loss does occur. They also may worry about the impact on their future earnings. And if my earnings aren't going to be what I need or what I think I deserve, again, I may choose just to step away rather than to do what we call power down. Powering down is finding ways to yes, step away, but not entirely. It may be that you want that you'd like to step away for 6 months, a year, 18 months, 2 years. And while you do, you want to remain active in some way in your industry, in your career, so that coming back when you're ready to come back isn't so challenging. And some of the strategies, some of the keys to powering down, whoops, my mouse was moving too fast there. Some of them are maintaining your competitive edge. You could do this by staying in touch with your team, or attending industry meetings or conferences that related to your role. We heard yesterday from a woman who said, I know somebody who, when she stepped away for a period of time, said, I can give 1 day a week during this year-long period that I'm out. And in that day a week, what I'd really like to do is some innovative, future-looking project. What's something that's intact that you can give me, rather than doing the job that I have been doing, which really requires more than a day a week. So she was staying connected to her organization, the role that she was playing, her team. And so she was keeping her network intact. Let your network know that, yes, you are interested in staying connected and you're not completely dropping out of the workforce. Ensure you stay mentally sharp. If any of you listening have had children, you may have experienced what I did, which was a complete loss of brain power, it felt like, in the first few days and weeks after my first baby was born. And sure, it has everything to do with hormones and lack of sleep and the way that your time and your attention is so divided in new and different ways. But once you get through that initial period, find ways by reading, by talking to people in your network, stay mentally sharp so that you're continuing to be able to bring yourself back into the workforce when you're ready. And if it's possible, outsource what I call low value activities. But what we mean by this are activities that don't require you. When you're stepping out or powering down from the workforce for a period of time, you're doing so because there's something important that you're being drawn to, children, elders, etc. And you're trying to power down and stay connected into your work world. The way to do that is to not do things that somebody else can do. Laundry, shopping, cleaning the house, etc. What are the things that somebody else can do? Those are some keys to powering down. And they may help you with your work-life balance, or we ask people actually to redefine work-life balance into work-life harmony, because honestly, there is no such thing as balance when we're talking about work and life. Some of the women that we interviewed talked about starting early in the day. Others said they really try to engage others, such as outsourcing some of those low-value activities, that they try to stay flexible. They try to understand that 1 week they may be able to balance work and life relatively well, and the next week they may not be. And they try not to let the changing balance of things really create a lot of tension for them. And then finally, they may integrate. And I'll share with you some research and a tool that we've developed with a researcher named Ellen Kosick. She did some research around work-life balance. And we together developed a self-assessment, which is available online. It's called the Work-Life Indicator. And through it, you learn whether you are an integrator or a separator. That's the first notion. So do I like to blend work and personal tasks and commitments, or do I like to keep them separate? I personally like to blend them. I like to take care of things when they need to be taken care of, whether it's personal family commitments during the workday or work commitments during the evening or the weekends when I'm on family time. I also then have friends who are separators. They want to keep personal and work tasks and commitments separately. They really want to define clean lines between them. Now, another way of seeing your preferences are work first or family first or cyclers. Work firsters will allow work to interrupt family, but not vice versa. Family firsters will allow family to interrupt work, but not the other way around. Cyclers are going to switch back and forth. Sometimes they're going to be highly integrated, and sometimes they're going to be highly separated. You often might see this in a role like a CPA, who has to separate things very clearly and really focus almost exclusively on work during tax time. But then they have other times when they can integrate in a different way. So what you'll do by taking this assessment is you'll answer some questions. You'll answer some questions also about how well you feel like you can control the boundaries between your work and your life. When you feel like you can control them, you have less tension. But when you don't feel like you can control them, then you've got more tension, and that limits us from feeling like we've got harmony between work and life. So I encourage you to go and look at on ccl.org and find the Work-Life Integrator and take that assessment. And think about, even before you take it, are you an integrator or a separator? Are you a work firster, family firster, or cycler? And does your role harmonize with your style, or does it create friction? And how can you create harmony and find some of that balance that you're looking for? Now, as we keep moving, the next thing that we talk about is creating your personal brand, your personal leadership brand in particular. Uh, Sylvia Ann Hewlett wrote a book on executive presence where she talks about gravitas and appearance and communications being critical parts of how we show up as executives, as leaders. Some of that does fall into the person that you create as your leadership brand. So your leadership brand is going to be what you want people to see in you and feel in you as you are demonstrating your leadership. It may be that that you want to be seen as a collaborative leader who thinks that everybody can be a leader, and you want to encourage that in people. That's more my personal brand. You may want to be seen as a strong leader who makes the decisions, and you want people to bring the information to you so that you're making the decisions based on their information. Whatever your desired leadership brand is, you need to create it. You need to cultivate it. You need to, I share my brand here on the right side. I'm a passionate leader who believes every single person can be a leader. Although I live in the town I grew up in, I'm a global citizen who thrives on experiencing other cultures. I'm a collaborative and supportive leader. I place high value on people and their needs and their feelings. I want people to experience that in me when I'm with them and when I'm not with them. I want that to be the memory of my brand that they carry with them because it is so strong. I want them to see it also in my social media. So I need to make sure my LinkedIn and my Twitter and my Facebook and my Instagram and my WhatsApp, everything is showing up as demonstrating that particular leadership brand. I encourage you to think about looking at your online presence, your social media links, and think about whether your leadership brand is reflected in them. Finally, the last chapter talks about how we as women leaders can then pay it forward. How can we help young women and even girls see themselves and develop their own leadership capability? As Portia and I were doing the research for the book, we came across some pretty disturbing data, some research that said that girls as early as 4th grade, 8 or 9 years old, were not seeing themselves anymore as leaders. They were believing that girls can't be leaders or that they themselves couldn't be leaders. It's really bothersome to us. We saw that girls and boys have a relatively small difference in their confidence levels when they're in elementary school, but it gets larger in high school. That elementary school girls take pride in their schoolwork, but they take much less pride in it when they get to high school. If we ask girls and boys about their talents, we find that, or about what they're proud, what they like about themselves, girls are more likely to talk about a physical characteristic, their hair, their eyes, their laugh, something like that. Boys are more likely to talk about their talents, their athletic ability, their wisdom, their intelligence. They are seeing more of an intrinsic, if you will, side to themselves and are proud of that. We want girls to be proud of that too. And girls' self-esteem drops between elementary and high school. Now, some of the reasons that this may happen is that they get these messages about they're being bossy. So the message that they get when they're called bossy is, don't stand up, don't be a leader, don't try to get people to do something that you think is a fun project or a fun game to play. Taking those roles, being aggressive and assertive like that is more for boys than it is for girls. They get that message. They also get a message that, well, maybe they're not even capable of doing it. Think about the times that you hear hear boys being told, don't throw like that. You're throwing like a girl. Don't cry. Only girls cry. The message that they hear, girls hear, is that they can't do something. They're not capable of throwing the ball or being emotionally strong, that there's something wrong with them. And so they get the message that they can't do something, or they don't know how to learn to do it. We do see that girls in girls' schools, girls-only schools, have a great opportunity to learn to be leaders because the only leaders in those schools are girls. They're playing team leader roles and class leader roles. But when they're in co-ed schools, they don't have as much opportunity to do that. And if they feel like, oh, I can't do that, I can't be a leader, that's something for boys. They're not likely to put themselves forward and take that risk. So we need to give them opportunities to learn where to be and how to be leaders, whether it's girls' clubs or mentoring girls. What can you do to help them learn how to be leaders? They may also not have role models. So what can we do to hold up successful women leaders, whatever part of the world they're in, government, corporate organizations, in their communities? How do we hold up successful women leaders and show them that, yes, there are women who have become leaders, and we need to emulate those. So I ask you, before we begin the Q&A, how can you be part of the solution? So I'll share here on the screen before I take it off of the screen and go back to video. The ways you can get in touch with me, please do. I'd love to hear your stories and learn about the successes and some of the challenges that you've had in demonstrating your leadership capability and growing towards your intention of being a leader. I share the two websites, kicksandglass.com and ccl.org/women here. The first is related to the book and has resources, and will, in short order, have a space where we can have some dialogue and build a community that are learning through each other about being women in leadership. With ccl.org/women, you'll get access to even more resources from CCL, other research. You'll find out about other offerings that we have for women leaders, programs and coaching and so forth. So I encourage you to reach out to both of those. So I'm going to now switch over and go back to sharing video there, so that we can see each other and get into some dialogue. I'm looking forward to your questions and your comments.
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer, for your great insights. That was a great presentation. So we'll now move to the questions from our attendees. So the first question is from Pratiksha. She says, I believe inequality exists in our minds, both men and women. So how do women overcome unconscious bias to rise up the ladder? Can you define some key unconscious bias that we should avoid?
Oh, I love that you brought that up. Yes, unconscious bias is something that absolutely gets in the way, as you pointed out, both for women's mindsets and men's mindsets. The first step is to understand that we have it, that we are holding unconscious bias, and that we're making decisions or not taking action based on it. And so that's the very first step. The next thing we can do is examine that and look at the ways in which, again, I think about something like the tips on imposter syndrome. What are the strengths that you have? What are the facts? So if you are letting unconscious bias get in your way because you're holding yourself back, then focus on those strengths. If you feel like you're holding someone else back, which may be, then again, look at what the facts are. Is this person well qualified? Don't make assumptions about whether they want or don't want to take on a particular role just because they're a woman. Focus on what they're capable of doing and break through it that way. I would recommend that both for men and for women.
Sure. So you talked about imposter syndrome. There's one question by Vinay. So he's asking, now when I heard about imposter syndrome, I can actually relate to some instances in my office and his team. So how can I, as a male manager, help my female team members to avoid imposter syndrome?
I love that you asked that question and that you're interested in it. Thank you. I hope that, and it sounds like you probably do, I hope that you have a good, transparent, transformative relationship with your team members, including the women on your team. And if that's the case, I would, I might not say I think you have imposter syndrome, but I might say I think you're selling yourself short. Here are the facts. Here are the strengths that you have. Here are the accomplishments that you've had. Let's talk about how to use those strengths and those accomplishments and help you move forward. Let's build a plan together. I want to be your partner in this. I love that you want to take a role in that.
Sure. So the other question is more from the organization perspective, where Disha is asking, when creating a leadership brand, is incorporating women in the leadership team just another tick off box?
So the problem is when it's seen as a tick off box, and it's when it's seen that we need there's a mandate that we need to have a certain percentage of women on the leadership team. And once we do, all problems will be solved. They won't. Culture needs to change. People's mindsets need to change. That we certainly need to speak about unconscious bias and removing unconscious bias, but we also need to be clear that there are sometimes conscious biases, intentional biases that are getting in the way, and we need to confront those. One of the stories that many women will share, and they've experienced this, is they've been, whether it's the only woman or one of several women on a team, and they raise an example. They're all brainstorming ideas for a new project or a way to go forward with the business, and a woman raises that idea, and people nod and then move on, and don't really acknowledge it, or that might happen, and then a person or two later, a man might say the very same thing, and people pay attention to it, and they want to hear more. That actually happens on a pretty regular basis. It's called overspeak. And so what needs to happen is that whether it's men or women on that team, is that they need to call it out. They need to see it when it's happening, not just the person who's experienced it, who it happened to, but others on the team need to say, you know what, there's a reason that we want this diverse mindset and diverse experience set on our team. So let's understand that idea that was just offered, and see if it might be something that we want to go forward with, and not just, we can't let it just be ticking off a box.
Sure. So continuing with the same similar topic of leadership brand. So like you mentioned earlier in your slide that most female leaders are seen as bossy. So how women in leadership should go about building their leadership brand? How employees can see them as a leader without any preconceived notions?
Mm-hmm. The first thing about a leadership brand is it needs to be authentic to you. And that's most critical. It needs to be then aligned with what your intention is. So think about those values you identified and the success you identified. And you need to work within your organizational culture to a certain extent. And I don't mean completely, but I do mean that if people don't expect women to be as assertive as they expect men, that's a bias that exists. So if that bias exists, we need to understand that and assert our leadership brand and our leadership authority in a way that is beginning to push some boundaries, but also not pushing them so hard that we aren't heard. And so we have to understand the context within which we're operating with our leadership, and build our leadership brand in the way that we want to build it, demonstrate it in the way that we want to build it, and just be aware that if it means that we're pushing harder than some around us are comfortable with, that we may need to do some additional work to get them comfortable with it.
So there's again one question on leadership. So Sonal is asking, how do you make the leadership more open to sponsoring meritorious women?
And I'm sorry, the sound broke up. Say that again, please.
Yeah, so she's asking, how do you make the leadership more open to sponsoring meritorious women?
Oh, well, one of those, and we certainly talk about this in the book, even though the book was written for women, we also speak to men and we speak to organizations in it because they've got to be our partners. So, what we would recommend is for organizations to help men and women understand what sponsors are and how to be sponsors. Oftentimes, leaders don't play that role at all because they don't understand what it is and they are uncomfortable with it. And so they need some educating, some awareness about what a sponsor is and how to do it. And they also need to be informed. They need to become aware that there is a shortage of sponsors for women, and that women really do need men as well as women to step up and be their sponsors.
Sure. So, in between, the talking point that I really liked was about networking, how crucial it is for women to build their own network. So, there is a question by Neeti. She's asking, for most women, it is not easy for them to network, or they don't know how to go about building a network. Can you suggest few ways on how someone can go about building a network which can help them in their career?
Yeah, so shamelessly, I would say buy the book, because the chapter on networking has an exercise in which we guide you through understanding the network, building, mapping out your current network, and understanding what roles might be missing. So the way to do it is really to map your network first, and to understand if you've got people in your network who can help you with. We talk about some roles I didn't have time to get into, but operational and personal and strategic parts of our network. We need people to be in our network in all of those spaces. We need mentors and sponsors. So understanding all of the roles that are needed, identifying who in your network is either already playing those roles or could play those roles, and identifying where you've got gaps is the way to get started.
Sure, sure. So, Jennifer, we are just running out of time. So, with this, I would like to wrap up today's webcast. And we have a lot of appreciation coming from the attendees about the session and about your work. And with this, we would wrap up the session. And thank you so much for your invaluable information and your time. Meanwhile, I would also like to thank our audience for attending the session, and they can provide their feedback in the survey link provided in the chat section because your input matters. Stay tuned for many more such exciting sessions. That concludes today's webcast. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Anushi, and thank you, everyone.